Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me along today. I get to talk about my favourite subject. I think I've seen a couple of you before. I certainly know Ben. Yes, I'm really pleased to come along and be able to talk to you about this, particularly in light of all the projects that you're working on at the moment. I've been reading through some of your goals for this particular course that you're on here, and I think a lot of it falls into what I'm going to talk about today, so hopefully you'll all find it really useful. First thing I'm going to say is we're talking about innovation, but the first thing here is around the sort of R&D tax relief side of things. This particular slide you can see now, we've sort of chosen this as a new way forward for us, for our branding and marketing, because one of the things that we really were aware of with the R&D tax relief and some innovation funding as well is that people don't necessarily see what they do as being innovative. So we sort of stumbled across this as almost a secondary logo, because I think it does make people realize that you don't need to be in a laboratory, you don't need to be right at the cutting edge of what we would historically have thought of as innovation to benefit from this type of funding, and particularly from the R&D tax relief. And we literally work with people across all types of workspaces, and I think this particular graphic here shows quite nicely how literally anywhere could be seen as an R&D lab when it comes to innovation. Started with that one just to hopefully set your minds and open them up a little bit into thinking a bit more widely about how people can benefit from these types of funding. Okay, so that's me, pre-lockdown hair. My hair grows really quick. Yeah, I'm head of business development. Basically, my role is all around raising awareness of R&D tax relief, and I make that point because it is difficult for people to understand themselves how what they do day in and day out could be classed as innovative. So we dedicate a lot of time to just talking about it, just raising awareness of it. I work with a lot of partners, a lot of introducers, and help them to explain it in terms that mean something to people. Hopefully today I'll be able to do that for you guys, and you'll go away just knowing a bit more about how it all works and how it can be related to your business. That's our head office in Ashford. I would have said a few months ago that there's 170 odd of us sitting in that office, all working, claiming money back from HMRC in various different ways. I work for the R&D team, but we also work with lots of other types of tax. As it stands at the moment, we've probably got 150 of them working from home. And I would say that going forward, we probably would retain about 100 working from home. So going back to the point earlier about an office space that's no longer required, we sort of have that. But we have the fortune of being in Ashford, which is desperately lacking good quality office space. So I'm sure that other people will snap that up as and when they need it. But yeah, quite a big team, been running for 20 years. So we've been around for a while and very well known to HMRC, which really helps when it comes to trying to get money out of them, for sure. Okay, so today we're going to look at funding innovation in construction specifically. I will say we work across all sectors, not just construction, but we do spend a lot of time within the construction industry because we have 20-year history of working with construction companies for other tax benefits as well. So that's why this was, I suppose, a natural leap across for us to just go straight into R&D with the construction companies. Although it has been tough because, again, they very much see themselves as construction. So again, little hint to try and change that mindset a little bit there. So we're going to have a look today at an overview of innovation funding, talk about the R&D tax relief for the construction industry, grants and equity funding, again for construction, I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of the bounce back loans and business interruption loan schemes from the government around the coronavirus. So we'll touch on that because it is important. Then we'll do a quick summary, and there'll be a short space for anybody who's got any immediate questions that they want to ask. And then we'll break out and go into the discussions that I think you're already all aware of the questions there. So if you do have any questions, I don't know, is there a chat facility? Maybe you can put them on, or just save them for the end and put your hand up, and we'll cover the best we can then. Alternatively, my contact details will be at the end as well, and feel free, anybody, to contact me, no matter how silly the question might sound. Trust me, it's not silly. I've heard it all, and it is, you know, it's worth asking to be sure as to whether you are entitled to claim this or not. So feel free to reach out. Okay, so the first thing that I do say to people, whenever talking about all sorts of different things across all types of sectors, is that, can I get funding for this? Always check it out, because you never really know. And people assume they can't. People do naturally assume that it's not for them. But it's, you know, you can get funding for some really weird and wonderful things. And, you know, what might seem a bit like an everyday must do in your business for you may not be when you're looking at it from a funding position. So R&D tax relief and R&D bridging, we'll cover that in a bit more detail in a moment. Basically, the R&D bridging is just a way of getting into your refund quicker than you normally would. So I'll explain how that all works. We'll talk about grants. You know, you hear a lot of talk about grants. There's a lot going on in that space, but it is tricky. It is difficult. Equity funding, I'll go into that in a bit more detail as well, and explain sort of what's going on in that world at the moment. And then you have the other one I've put on the bottom here is the patent box. This gets overlooked a lot because people, again, it's complicated because it's HMRC, but it is well worth looking at. At any point that you are looking to get a patent for anything that you might do, now, even if it's the tiniest little widget, it's worth looking and seeing, you know, how does this affect me, and is this a way I can reduce my corporation tax? So that's just sort of a little bit of an overview of the bits that we're going to talk about. So let's move on to the R&D tax relief. Okay, so what is it for? That's the big question, isn't it, really? You know, the first thing I would say is R&D tax relief is there. It's a way of reducing your corporation tax to help you spend money on innovation. That's what it's for. The government want UK businesses to be at the forefront of innovation. They don't want them to be falling behind everyone else and us having to be entirely reliant. So it's a subsidy. The way that it works is you have to be eligible to pay corporation tax. You don't need to be paying it, so you could be in losses. You could even be, you know, pre-revenue, pre-trade. But you do have to have the corporation tax facility there to enable you to claim it. It's really there, as I say, to promote innovation. And what that means is a different thing to everybody. You know, some companies, their innovation is very deliberate. They've decided to bring a new drug to market. They've decided to develop new software. They've decided to, you know, to bring a completely new product that's going to revolutionize vacuum cleaners. I don't know, all sorts of things, but it's a deliberate attempt at bringing something new to market. And yes, that absolutely qualifies in many cases. That deliberate, we have a budget, we have an R&D team, we may even have an R&D space, and we've definitely got a deliberate project, absolutely qualifies. However, what we find a lot of the time is that the claims that we're dealing with are what we would class as accidental R&D. So it's not that someone has had a really amazing idea and decided to bring something entirely cutting edge to market. It's more that needs must. I think we've all heard the saying that necessity is the mother of all invention. This just is exactly for that, really. And we find that the majority of the claims that we deal with are actually for people who have had a problem or a challenge in their everyday work, and they have had to find an innovative solution because the solutions that are available don't quite work for them. So it might be that there is something, but it's not quite what you wanted to achieve. It might be that it's just too expensive. It might be that, yes, you can get what you want for the price you want, but you can't have it for a year and you need it now. There's so many different variations on what can be thrust upon you, that you have to be innovative. You have to come up with something a bit outside the box. You have to sort of get your head together with your experts and try and solve this issue. And it could just be so that you can bring a project in on time or close to time, or it might be that you're just trying to do it cheaper. You're trying to bring it into budget. So yes, deliberate R&D, absolutely. But really the bit that I think everyone should be considering is much more around what you accidentally find yourself being innovative about. And that's normally solving problems or challenges. That's the bit that most people have problems getting their head round, is seeing that what they do in their business is innovative as opposed to needs must. And I'm going to say it now, that in the construction industry, the throwback that I get the most is, but we're engineers, that's what we do. That doesn't mean, because you're an engineer, that it excludes you from being innovative. Most engineers I meet are pretty innovative. So try and sort of switch maybe that internal dialogue into, you know, are we being innovative here, as opposed to we're just doing what we do because we have to, otherwise we won't get to finish the job. Okay, so what's the benefit? So there's two different schemes. There's one for SMEs and there's one for large companies and those that can't claim on the SME scheme. The SME scheme is far more generous. You can get up to 33% of your qualifying costs back in tax relief. So so for every £100,000 that we would identify, you could potentially get £33,000 back into your accounts from that. And you could use it, you can have cash back, or you can use it to offset your future tax relief. So the thing I would say to everybody, regardless of what your preconceived ideas about how innovative you are is, speak to an expert about your activity and let them tell you whether you should be claiming this tax relief or not, because it's very valuable and a lot of businesses are doing it. And if you're not, then you are at a disadvantage, really, because your competitors probably are. You're wondering how are they doing it at that price? Well, if they know that they're going to be getting back a percentage of their problem solving costs, then you know that could be a contributing factor. One of the other you can go back 2 financial years as well, which is really interesting, because for those that have claimed for the first time, you've got 2 years that you can retrospectively claim, and then you'll have your current year. So the timeline to be mindful of there is making sure that you don't go beyond your current financial year without checking it out. Because if you do, you'll move forward a year and lose your last year. I hope that makes sense. The other thing about it is that it does promote a culture of innovation. Once you know you can claim it and your whole team are aware of it and are reporting on their innovative problem solving, then it creates that mindset of, well, this is it being encouraged. We need to look at this more because actually, although it's costing us X, we're getting Y back. So it's an investment. What type of activity qualifies? So we talked about the accidental and the deliberate R&D, and it really is about overcoming problems and challenges. You hear a lot of talk about it needing to be technical or scientific bias. Yes, it does, but don't you worry about that. Let your consultant worry about that, because they're the ones that understand exactly how that fits within the scheme. Don't discount yourself by going, well, I'm not scientific and this isn't really technical. It's actually the activity that you go through and the end result that needs to have a scientific or technological advancement. And in many cases it will have, but that might not be how you see it. So the way I always look at it, to simplify it, because I find that it is confusing for people, is these are the questions that I normally say to people. If you have a problem or a challenge, it requires an expert. That expert also finds it challenging to resolve. So they can't just say to you, oh yeah, I know how to do that, do this, you'll be fine. And at the end of it, you've learned something new that A, could be a competitive advantage to you, and you may not want to share with your competitors, or it might be something that you go, crikey, we can really move the industry forward with this, and you do want to share it with your competitors. So you've got a challenge or a problem, needs expertise, there's been a bit of trial and error with your experts in resolving it, and you've learned something new. Those are the main activities that would qualify, something within that. And how that sort of tends to relate to the construction industry, we find the majority of our claims come from conservation and heritage, logistical problems, and groundworks. They are the main ones that people don't realise they can claim for, but they can, as long as it meets that basic criteria that we've talked about there. I hope that's making sense to everybody. I will keep saying it, it's not easy to identify for yourself when whether what you're doing qualifies or not, because the guidelines are very grey. So it is about that expertise. It is about being able to look at the bigger picture and relate what you're doing to the scheme rules and be able to put the two together and go, yes, okay, we get it. So that's, I guess that covers the types of activity that qualifies. One of the things that I haven't put on there is the type of costs that you can include in that. And the best way of looking at it is consumables. If it is something that is used up in the project, then we would look to see whether we can include all of it, some of it, depending on what it is. The majority of claims, it's man hours. It's actually PAYE. It's the amount of time people spend looking at the hole, scratching their head. That type of cost. Oversimplified, of course, but it's that type of cost. So you can go back 2 years and you can include lots of different projects, lots of different activities within a claim. Bridging finance, what that does is, with R&D tax relief, you have to get to the end of your financial year, look at all the costs you've incurred, and then you claim it after your financial year has finished. With bridging, you can get to a point partway through the year where you can actually get a bridging loan on your claim, whereby you can claim normally 6 is the sort of shortest, but normally around 9 months into your financial year, you can make a claim, and you will be advanced the money, and then when your claim goes through HMRC, you obviously pay your bridging loan back. So that's an interesting opportunity. So how does that fit for the construction industry? Problem solving is just part of what you do. Looking at your projects that you're all working on at the moment, interestingly, a lot of them do fit around the areas that I've got on here. So net zero carbon, government targets to be greener, faster and cheaper, sustainable development goals, digital, embracing new tech. When I say embracing new tech, I don't mean just using something new. That means in that context, you need to be either using something new in a different way, you need to be using something new and enhancing it, or maybe joining it with other tech that you're also using. So it's not just a matter of buying something new and using it. You can't claim that cost back. You need to go through that, having to solve the problem or challenge in using it. You need the experts. You need to go through those stages, and then at the end of it, you've learned something new. But what we see is a lot of people embracing tech, finding that it does part of the job, but it doesn't do the whole job. So they do need to enhance it in some way. Off-site and modular, loads in that, because the area we find with off-site is it's great in the factory, great on paper, but when you actually try and I'm not construction technically there, but put it all together is the phrase I'm going to go with. That's where it hits all the problems. And we find there are many issues with actually securing those modular constructions, those pods, in a way that meets the standards and requirements. So it's across everything that the industry is talking about at the moment. There is so much talk about these, net zero carbon, etc. The greener, faster, cheaper targets, main part of constructing excellence whole ethos, really. I don't think there's a business out there that isn't talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. Digital construction, how long have we been talking about that, and we're still trying to work out the way forward. Again, I see in some of your project notes there that you've, some of you are looking at that. So I would say construction is right in the middle of activity that could qualify, but they, as an industry, as a sector, not really that used to being able to get this type of support and help. So are maybe not the quickest to put their hand up and say, can I talk to you about this? I do a lot of different presentations for lots of different sectors. Everywhere I go, I stop talking. Normally this is the face-to-face stuff. I stop talking. We have Q&A, I wander off, and I have a queue of people wanting to ask me. If I go to a construction event, you can guarantee that doesn't happen. Why is that? I don't understand why that is, because from all the industries that I see, the construction industry is tough. It's hard work to make your projects pay. It's constantly overcoming problems and challenges. So if I can just change mindset slightly, I would say always ask the question, because you just don't know whether you're missing out or not. Okay, on to some grant funding. So grant funding is, actually, before I go on to grant funding, I'm just going to go back to, well, I won't go back to that previous slide, but just to add to it, post-COVID is another good reason to be looking at why you can get funding, because there are so many businesses that are having to do things entirely differently. So again, that's another point that I should have made on the previous slide. I think that ask someone, have a look at it, because everyone's doing things differently to keep their business going. And we can see the dramatic changes in businesses. So again, that's another area that I think it is well worth looking to see if any of your plans and activities are eligible, A, for funding, and B, would qualify for R&D tax relief. And it's good to know with the R&D tax relief, even though you can't claim it until after you've completed your year, it's good to know it's coming, so it can help with budgeting, etc., and cash flow. Okay, so grants and equity funding. Quick time check. We're okay. Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of an awkward one now. If I'd been speaking to you 6 months ago, I would have been perhaps a little bit more more positive about it. Equity funding is always problematic. So equity is where you basically give away a share of your business for someone to invest in it. It's a good way of doing it because you often get the expertise as well as the money, although sometimes that's not what people want. So equity funding, as you can absolutely understand, at the beginning of this lockdown, at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of the equity funding companies were understandably reluctant to invest because they don't know. They like to know exactly what's going on. Of course, nobody knew. So a lot of the equity funding has been very slow coming forward. A lot of the angels have just sort of run for the hills really and taken their money with them. That won't be forever. They will need to invest that money and move forward. One thing I would say about equity funding, well, and grant funding, if you're looking to raise any money in these fields, know your numbers, know your project, know exactly what it is, what you're looking to achieve, what you want to do, because they are inundated with people asking them for money. And it's always, with grant and equity, it's always a competition. The one that looks the best gets the money. Simple as that. So if you're lacking in detail, lacking in information, or in some cases, too much of the wrong detail, these sort of grant writers and equity funding people will be just redline through you. They won't even read it. So it's all about really understanding what your project is and what your business plan is and what it is that you want to achieve. Know exactly what the problem is, what the solution is, who your competitors are, what your business model is, what your roadmap is, who your team are, all the financials, and be very clear on how much money you need and why. So a lot of people go in a bit wishy-washy, a bit just put an application in and that will be fine. It's it doesn't work. You don't get the money, and even more so now. You won't get funded if you don't have the right pitch deck. And there's lots of companies out there that can help you with that. But I would say it's really important to be very clear. If you're going for grant or equity funding, know your stuff, be very clear on it. And I know that sounds obvious, but we've all seen Dragon's Den. It's like that for a reason. And I think a lot of the equity funders now model themselves on those dragons, but you can understand why. It's their business, it's their money that they're investing, and they want to put it in the best place possible. So grant and equity funding, grants particularly at the moment is difficult again. Innovate UK is absolutely flooded with applications. Anyone that's applied for a grant recently will see that they opened up a grant, I think it was about March time. They got inundated. They couldn't manage all of the applications. They had changed the spec to make it easier for people to apply, saw the error of their ways and has now reverted and made it more difficult for people to apply. They've shortened the term. So you normally only get about a month now. You used to get 3 months to put your application in. They made it shorter, so you only had to put less wording in. Now they've expanded it again, so you have to work harder for your money. And a lot of what they are offering at the moment doesn't really fit that well with the construction industry. There are a couple that are open. I would suggest you go and have a look if you're interested on the Innovate UK website. One of them closes on the 29th of July, and that's round one for a temporary framework. Opened on the 29th of June, closes on the 29th of July. There's another one that is finishing on the 5th of August. They are the two at the moment that sort of fit most closely. There's 25 competitions out there at the moment, and they mainly are around low energy, clean energy, a lot of agri-tech, smart manufacturing, and zero emissions. So if anything you're doing within construction that can fit into those, it's worth having a little look. But again, I would go back to one of my previous slides. Always, everything you're doing, check the funding. Have yourself a friendly grant person that you can just phone up and say, I'm doing this, I'm thinking of doing that, is there any funding? And they'll tell you. To ask the question is what I'm saying. Always ask the question, because you just don't know what Innovate UK might just pop in there. And there's lots obviously around COVID, and rebuilding businesses that will sustain beyond the pandemic. So again, have a look. Nothing specifically construction, but a lot of that, as I say, is around low energy, clean energy. You need to really meet their requirements. So it's a bit pot luck if there is something that works for you. But I'm going to say it again, get yourself a friendly grant person or a friendly equity funding person and just ask the question. Because if someone else can pay for it, why would you? Okay. Oh, and the other thing there, of course, with a lot of this stuff, with the R&D, with grant funding and with equity funding, is it does help with cash flow if you find yourself in those situations. Much bigger area to discuss there around borrowing for cash flow, etc. But you know, just something to consider. Okay, I'm sure you all know about the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme and bounce back loan scheme. Grants, SIBBLs and BIBBLs, and SME R&D tax relief are all notified state aid, which means you can only use one per project. If you've got a grant, then you know, for your R&D activity, you could claim on the RDEC scheme that I mentioned for the large companies. So there are ways around it, but it's not as anywhere near as lucrative. The best thing to do if you are using if you're claiming R&D and you're using one of these other forms of state aid, is to limit where you spend the grant or the bounce back loan or the business interruption loan onto maybe one project. Don't just spread it across everything you do, because then you limit your opportunity to claim across all those projects. You know, if you have got several projects that qualify for R&D and you do have a loan and you're using it for that innovation, you know, you do have one of these bounce back loans or business interruption loans, the best thing to do is to spend it on one, so that you're one project, so that, you know, as I say, you don't compromise your opportunity to claim on the other projects and get the higher level of tax relief. So again, I would say if you're doing this activity, just speak to somebody and just go, look, this is what I'm doing, how am I best to do it? It comes back to, you know, don't make those mistakes.
Julie, we just got a question. Can you give the long form of SIBBLs and BIBBLs? Although I love the acronym, how it's said.
So SIBBLs is the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, snappy title. And BIBBLs is the bounce back loan scheme.
Great, thank you.
And if you go, well, if you Google it, you'll get a million people offering to provide those for you. And you can go on to gov.uk and hear it from the horse's mouth. There's a lot of explanation about qualifying and how to go about it, because obviously this is what the government has done to try and help businesses survive. Okay, so that's basically me. That's the presentation. This is the sort of the summary slide here. Again, it's coming back to a similar thing as I mentioned on the very first slide. This could be for anybody that you know, qualifies. So, you know, corporation tax, business, doing qualifying activity. And you know, I think that the message that I do try and get across, and hopefully has come across, is don't eliminate yourself, because you could well be missing out. Just speak to someone. There's very, very few businesses that will charge you, and if they are going to charge you, don't use them, just to find out whether you qualify. You know, it's a consultative discussion around what do you do, what does the scheme work, how do the two align. You know, it's not simple, it's not straightforward. So you know, particularly where R&D tax relief is concerned, as part of your everyday business, it would be worth asking someone about all the projects you take on. You know, part of the service that we offer is when we take a client on board is we do a quarterly review with them. So every quarter we go into their business and we say, what are you doing? What's happening? They tell us and we say, right, keep information on that one, but don't bother on that one because it doesn't qualify. And that helps them to gather the information. So when they get to the end of the year, and obviously as they work through the year, they know what they're going to be getting back. I would say that, you know, for all businesses, that is a good use of what is probably an hour once a quarter to find out whether you're missing out or not. So I would recommend that people do look into it. And with the grants and the equity, not great at the moment because of COVID, but going forward that will change. And there's a lot of money out there that people want to invest. So why not you?
Julie, thank you very much. Just for the group, any questions at this stage on the presentation, thoughts, comments?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Julie, in construction, there's a lot of subcontracting, so there's a kind of supply chain delivering a project. Yeah. And one of the concerns I've had around R&D is that the main contractor might be claiming our innovation within their claim, but we also want to claim it as well. And is there potentially an issue? And we're very close to some of our contractors. They might say, we solved this, we're building services contractor. And they'll say, we as main contractor solved this issue in this listed building.
Right.
But we also want to put that in our claim. And it's a concern that I've had. I've kind of never asked anyone, but it's just nagging down.
Absolutely understand that. The good thing about this scheme is that you can only claim what's gone through your accounts. So you need to have the invoices for it. If you've got the invoices for it, then you're the one that's paid for it. Right, this is where I don't want to sort of confuse people, but I'm going to go with this and try and explain it. So the way that it works is you need to have the risk, and that risk is you're paying for it at your cost, basically. So if you are being entirely paid for all of your time and your project comes in with you making the profit margins that you wanted without you having had to spend any of your own money to achieve it, then you've been paid and recompensed for all of that problem solving and all of that work you've done. In the construction industry, that rarely happens. Normally there's a fixed price and you then have to deliver. If for you to deliver that project, you have had to compromise your budget, compromise your margins, so you've basically not made as much money as you thought you would because the job has been more complicated. You are the person with the risk. You are the person with the claim.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful, yeah.
And the other thing to bear in mind as well is that if your main contractor is a large company, they can't claim for subcontracted work anyway.
Right.
So the scheme is different, it's a lot less generous. They will only get 12% and then have to pay tax on it. So again, I think it's complicated, and particularly with the supply chain, it is about who actually had the risk, who paid who to do what. But the best way of looking at it, when we go into businesses, we normally say to them, tell me about the projects that have gone over on time and over on budget. And they say, that's all of them.
Surely not.
But we say, okay, tell us about the ones that kept you awake at night. And guess what they say?
Yeah.
That's all of them. Yeah, it's those cases where you expected to make X% profit, you didn't because it was more complicated. There were unseen issues, there were design problems. It's worth talking about them to see if any of the activity that you took to solve those problems qualifies. I'm not saying it all does, but that's where we find the ones that the activities that qualify.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Just looking at the screen, any other question before we go into sort of the breakout groups and give you a chance to think for yourselves on this? Thanks, man. You have to see shakes. I can't. Brilliant. Thank you. If you just go on one, Julie, thank you. If you go one more slide. We gave you these questions before, and I just really wanted to shift the dynamic as we work together this time to ensure that you're going where your energy is.